Hey Ashley, how are you today?
I am doing well, Jeff.
It's great. So, it's a month ago now, but we came through May, which was Mental Health Awareness Month. We're just at the very beginning of July, which is Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. And in reality, though, every month should be some sort of mental health awareness month. And, I think that's especially true for workplaces because you know, studies show that 1 in 6 employees in the workforce across the country are dealing with some sort of mental health issue. So I think it's really important to have a candid conversation about what it's like as an employer to have employees that are dealing with mental health issues or mental illnesses, and also what it's like as an employee. How do you deal with the environment and what you're feeling and what you're going through and experiencing and still try to produce and be the type of employee you want to be. And I think that's really important conversation that can be helpful for businesses, companies, organizations, as they navigate the workspace in this new environment where people are really talking about mental health a lot more. um, so how do you feel about talking about that, Ash?
I mean, I think it excites me. I have had a mental illness longer than I've had a career. And so for me, that means that working with that really shapes everything that I um, have been able to both provide anybody that I've worked for and also kind of what I've been able to get back from employers and learned along the way. And I think NAMI has a really special place in my heart about all of that, whether that's national or here. So I'm excited to talk about this because I do think it's such an important topic to um, not just be candid about, but kind of like add nuance and add both like the dichotomy of what employers need versus what employees need.
And I think it's important to note that being NAMI Buffalo and Western New York, National Alliance on Mental Illness, we are fortunate in the sense that we have a lot more awareness. We have a lot more experience working with individuals who have some sort of lived experience with mental illness, whether it's their own or that of a loved one. Um, so not all companies have that. Not all companies, are able to have the insight that we do, but hopefully we can share some of that. Something I do want to know, and I've kind of noticed this trend maybe over the last 10 years or so, but I think there's become more of an emphasis on working to live instead of living to work. And in that process, it's showing up as your true self in the workplace, making sure that, you have a job and it's important to do the job. But there's so much more to who you are and your identity than just your job. And I think that's a really important trend in workplace wellness to really be who you are, but also prioritize out of work and work balance, work and life balance.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that um, there are circumstances that makes feeling safe in your ability to do that as an employee, maybe not challenging, but there's when I think that as someone who has a mental illness who has navigated both having a job and not having a job during recovery, there is obviously a need to work. And then there's also this need to take care of yourself, have a family, have friends, have, go to the grocery store, do your laundry. I'm not sure what anyone else gets up to, but um, I don't think that I'm the best person to speak to that change because of how early in my career I am. I think that that's something that's always been baked into how I navigate advocating for myself in a workplace. And I think that that's something that, I mean, I'm really grateful that I learned really early on is that nobody's going to save me but myself. And so if something in the workplace isn't working for me, it's really my job to communicate that, my job to work for solutions or find other ways to have that work-life balance that maybe isn't so burdensome to um, either party. I'm not sure.
Mhm. So you started with us about 6 months ago, right?
I did. I started on
And
January 6th.
there you go. So, and I think that over that time, you and I have been sort of trying to, and it's an interesting time to shoot this video because we're in the midst of figuring out
Mm,
what's the best thing that best work environment that works for you, but also that works for, NAMI and
yeah.
being able to get the work done that you were hired to do. We're navigating it, and it's not a cut and dry. It's done. We're moving forward. It's every day we have to keep evolving and we have to keep adjusting and we have to be very fluid and flexible. So it's really interesting that we can have this conversation and share it with people and what our experience has been. But what you just brought up is that something I have appreciated so much about you as an employee, besides the work that you do, which is outstanding, it's that you are a very good self advocate. I'm not a mental health professional. I am, executive director of an organization. I'm not a counselor. I don't want to be your counselor. Um, but I also do not know what it's like to feel and experience the things that you're feeling
Mm,
and to have the needs that you have. And I think I'm grateful to have the opportunity and some mentors and some guidance and people teaching me how to be a good listener to those things.
mm,
But that only works when you are able to self advocate and share what it is that you're feeling, what it is that you're experiencing. And I think that's really important to have that open line of communication as an employer to an employee, whether it's about mental health, physical health, or anything. But really, when it comes to mental health, trying to create an environment where you feel safe and comfortable to share your experience
mm.
and your feelings, and also being a listener as an employer, being a listener to what you're really saying and trying to accommodate as we can what some of your needs are.
Yeah, I mean, I think something that stands out to me about um, how we've navigated the last 6 or so months is um, that open communication and then all of the like little trust building exercises that we have to do of like, okay, I say I will finish this by this time. I do finish this by this time. You say you I don't know, and then we follow through and things get done and keep moving. I also think that something that I was really grateful to learn in my history at NAMI National, something someone told me there is that clarity is care. And I think that that's something that I seek very often and openly now is that clarity. And something that you're able to provide me in the workplace is just very clear expectations about what I need to do today, this hour, this afternoon, this morning. Because something that I can struggle with is like the big picture. There's so much mental health work to do. Everyone is struggling. I'm struggling. Sometimes the work feels very big.
Heavy.
It feels big, heavy. Yes, it
Yeah.
feels almost too big for our small team to handle. And I think that's something that you're able to really do and a strength that you bring to this relationship is that you're able to kind of take apart all of that like big picture like anxiety that I bring to the table and really focus it into like, okay, well, this is your role. This is what we're doing. This is how our organization is changing and growing. So, what needs to get done today, this week, or even this month? Um, but I also think that like being an advocate for myself like that has been a practice in learning how to both stay like safe in the workplace while disclosing, while um, being honest and showing up and being true to myself and what I'm experiencing and maybe the severity of it. I think that when I was younger, which is funny because I know that you think I'm very young. I am very young. I still have much to learn, but when I was younger, I think that I felt very compelled to share so much that it couldn't be misinterpreted or it couldn't be misunderstood, which is a very youthful, naive mindset, maybe, because no matter how hard any of us try, people are always going to misunderstand us or maybe not get everything we're trying to say when we're trying to say it. Because no matter what, there are barriers to being honest about your mental health in the workplace. And I think that's the most important thing that I would want people to gather from this conversation is that like it's learning and growing and practice for both of us to reach middle grounds that work for both the business and for each of us individually.
And
Um,
I want to get back to what some of those barriers are a little bit later on. But if we're talking to a business or a company or organization, it could be one as small as us with less, five or fewer employees, or it can be a giant organization that has hundreds of employees. I think one of the some of the most important things that you can start out with is, first of all, create a culture that supports everyone within the organization to be open about mental health, their mental health, their family's mental health, to the point that they're comfortable. But for that person to be comfortable, you have to make it be okay for people to share about this stuff.
yeah.
I don't think people have too much of a problem saying, oh, I slept terrible the night before, or I have a cold, or I'm coming down with the flu, or, I can't stand at my job because I'm on crutches, I broke my leg. People are okay sharing about that. It seems that we need to still come a little bit further to be able to share like that about your mental health or your mental wellness. So
Yeah.
creating a culture that is non-judgmental, that really prioritizes listening and meeting a person where they are, so that you can really share about what it is that you're experiencing, what it's feeling. I think that's really important for an employer to do. I think it's also important to have as many people within the organization trained in some way. And it could be a mental health first aid training, it could be other trainings that you go to, or you could have NAMI come in and give a presentation, or another organization come in and give a presentation to really help everyone in the organization know how to have conversations about mental health, and how to support somebody who might be experiencing, whether it's a crisis or just a mental health, mental, just a bad day. I mean, because we're talking about mental health issues that can range from anxiety and depression to more serious persistent mental illnesses. I mean, you see the whole range of those within the workplace. How do we talk about them? How do we respond when somebody talks about them? And how do we react when somebody is in need in that situation?
Yeah.
Um, and then what accommodations are needed. I think you brought up something really important. Um, once we create this culture that it's okay to share, it's okay to talk about your mental health with an employer, with coworkers, whatever. I think it's important then for a supervisor or a boss to figure out what is the best work environment for that individual. Um, you brought up the fact that setting really clear expectations. I think that's really important for a lot of people to have that, where it can be broken down just into, you know, prioritizing tasks and setting goals that are agreed upon, that are reachable and reasonable, and then just always have that open line of communication. We have our weekly one-on-ones, but it ends up being almost daily, where we're talking and just saying, hey, checking in, how you doing? Or you're checking in and saying, hey, this is what I'm working on. And I think having that really flexible and open communicative relationship is really, really critical.
No, I do. I mean, I think that something just building off of that is how can we convince or maybe show or demonstrate to people the importance of that kind of depth in a relationship between coworkers or within the workplace. I think that humanizing workers and humanizing the people who are showing up to a cause, whether this is another nonprofit that we're speaking on or a service agency in the mental health space, I think that something that I know that happens in our world is compassion fatigue and just not being able to emotionally meet someone where they're at because of all the other things that go on for all of us. I also think that the kinds of relationships that build like true accommodations and like true accessibility take time and energy and patience and practice. And I don't think that a lot of us learn how to have those relationships in the workplace when we're being taught how to go through young adulthood. I think that a lot of people are really conflict averse, and I think that mental illness and the very real consequences of it in the workplace make it so that conflict is inevitable. And if you're not willing to meet that conflict or disappointment or when an expectation maybe isn't met with compassion or at least curiosity, then then I worry that we're assuming things about people with mental illnesses that maybe aren't true because of the way that symptoms show up in the workplace. I know that something that I really fear is being perceived as someone who like doesn't want to do the work or like is lazy or I don't know. I'm very cognizant of how I show up at work and to go back to what you were saying about making sure that there's a culture where we can all come to work as ourselves. I think that's something that I'm currently learning is how to kind of like lessen the barrier between like work me and out of work me and make it so that there's only one me who shows up to all the situations they can to the best of their ability and and does good work wherever they are. And so I think that's a different piece to it too, is that equal investment maybe from like employer and employee is
Yeah.
important.
No, I 100% agree. And, I think about, we're lucky. We work for an organization that provides a service, a nonprofit. We have a mission and goals. And, I think about how does this translate to, a company that makes widgets or a bank or a law firm or whatever. Um, And you
Mm.
mentioned that getting to this point where there is this communication and this way to coexist and to be successful and productive in a work environment, it takes practice and it takes hard work. And those are things that don't show directly on the bottom line. It's
No.
not, it's not creating more product. It's not, um, you know, affecting the workflow. Maybe even it might take away a little bit at first from the workflow because you're taking the time to have these conversations and to
Hmm.
have these listening sessions. But what I think that when a business or an organization supports an employee in dealing with whatever their mental health is, you know, in this day and age, employee retention is so critical. And if you're supporting your employees in this way, they're going to want to stay or they're going to be able to stay a lot easier. But it's even more than that. It also sends a very strong message about the values of your company. We have a product to put out, we have a service to provide, we do this or that or whatever. Um, but what are your company's values? And I think that's really important in the marketplace now, not just what you do or what you provide as a business, but how you treat people, how you treat the world around you. And, I think that's a great way for an employer or in a business to demonstrate that their values are lived through both what they produce and through how they treat their employees.
Absolutely. I was really I had a moment I had an adjustment period when I was at NAMI National because I had never met so many people in a single workplace who had so many similar conditions to me who had been at a company for 10, 7, 5 years. I will be honest in that I would be considered a job hopper because I haven't been able to find accommodations that do allow me to stay and grow and really like settle in somewhere. I think that, I mean, that's also like another personal thing that I'll have to confront at one point or another, but you're right in that I don't think it's fair to assume that people like want to leave or aren't invested if something is if they don't have a need, if they have a need that's being unmet. So I think that I'm lucky enough where I have had some flexibility to kind of like wait until I found a company whose values aligned with me. Um, but not everyone has that. And so I think that um, there's a tension for me in this conversation of like, okay, well, what are other accommodations that would work at a tech company who makes widgets or a bank or I think there has been such a strong whiplash culturally in workplaces from the freedom that remote work and COVID kind of provoked within certain sectors. And I guess I'm trying to stay open-minded about like why that backlash has been so drastic and why remote and hybrid options are kind of being taken from people because I think that that's one of the things that has been the most accommodating was remote hybrid now, but I was fully remote at NAMI National. Um, and having systems that really fully integrate all the remote workers, I thought was um, so beneficial for that culture of like trust and security and like looking up to mentors who had been dealing with similar things for so long in this remote environment. Um, Yeah, watching my coworkers just so easily take lunch breaks was groundbreaking for me. You know what I mean? Like I really had to adjust to let my nervous system kind of settle from like the go of my first couple of jobs to no, we want sustainable work, we want healthy work, um, and I still kind of have to balance that part of me that always wants to like be doing more and producing more and giving more and just being the best version that maybe like other people think I could be or maybe I do want to be with the very real realities of like I have a limited capacity some days. This chronic condition of mine flares at, I would say, the most inopportune times. And I do sometimes need to be honest with myself about like where maybe I'm like borrowing time from like other aspects of my life and like if it gets to a point where it's like not sustainable even in a supportive environment then again it just goes back to like what it's information for me to think about what needs I have that maybe aren't being met and then make sure that everyone's on the same page even if you don't need to know that like I guess I can't think of a specific example. I'm pretty open, but
I
um,
think you've given enough, and you like in the moment you've shared them, and I think that's been important. You mentioned something, and I think we're in this time, and it's been a long time. I think it's probably 15, 20 years. We're in this really slow prodding along, but there is a culture shift in how work is perceived from that go, 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 go to, how do you have high productivity, but in a way that is sustainable for the employee? And I love that term that you use, sustainable work. But that's hard to do because there are barriers. And I want to get back to, both for you personally, but maybe in general, with a lot of your experience and your education and, everything. What are some barriers that individuals who might be dealing with some sort of mental health issue or a mental illness in the workplace? What are some of the barriers to their success that you've seen?
I mean, I know that I have my own feelings about maybe like the word stigma or the fight against stigma, but I do think that that's one of the most um, prominent barriers because of how much is at stake if someone is too honest in an unsafe environment. I worry that employers maybe aren't looking for or can't recognize the signs of some of the more common symptoms and ways in which trauma or distress or even stress can show up in the workplace and in workers.
Hmm.
Um, but I know that even for me, there is um, a level of there's something there between me being like, okay, I know I have a mental illness. I know it's chronic. I know it's going to impact me every day at work for the rest of my life. And me coming to you or even coming to this um, roundtable and maybe opening myself up to the shame and judgment and stigma that, say, suicidality or hearing voices or just like some of these other more severe, more distressing symptoms that I do experience regularly show up for me. And so I know that I also have a certain presence when I'm all here that allows me to kind of articulate some of these things in ways that are more easily received by people in positions of authority. And I just can't separate that from people who have bipolar 1, who have schizophrenia, who have PTSD, who might not have homes, who might not have jobs because of the ways maybe they can't articulate what it is that they need or what they're experiencing in those safe ways. And so I just think there's layers to it. And so I think stigma and like learning baseline language and learning maybe more stigmatized symptoms and like destigmatizing, whether that's voices or hygiene or um, depression and suicidal ideation. I think that all of those things, like because they are so, like you said, experienced by so many people in the American workforce and experienced so silently. I think it really is the responsibility of employers to at least be up to date on the language so that if someone
Yeah.
comes with the word paranoia, like what does that mean? How does that impact maybe their technology use? You know what I mean? Like what are some common symptoms or presentations of paranoia? And I think everyone should know that a common paranoid delusion is either like psycho-religious or like psychotechnology. Like those are pretty two main buckets in 2025. And I just think that there's so much more that we all have to learn about
Hmm.
how we all experience each other in this life. Um,
And I think there's ways for employers to learn that. I mean, they can actively
mm,
research. There can be trainings through a NAMI or a mental health advocates or other organizations that do these types of trainings, Best Self as well. Um, but I think a lot of the learning is done through experience and through listening.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. And you've mentioned this a few times, an unsafe workplace. And when some people hear unsafe, they might think that it's like physically unsafe, or you're
Mm,
dealing with very explicit um, things like discrimination, harassment, and those types of things. But there's also very implicit, maybe not intentional, but
yeah.
people might not be unaware, or people might not be aware of their use of language,
Yeah.
or the implicit ways that maybe we make somebody feel uncomfortable or even unsafe in a workplace.
Yeah, I think there's subtleties to the ways that our assumptions show up in the ways that we talk to each other. And I do think that even if safety in the workplace does not mean I'm going to work and expecting to get hit or something, I think that there can be safety considerations in, okay, does this person feel safe to be honest? Because employers have a position of power in that people can't survive without jobs. Be like we can't afford housing, food, cars, etc.
Right.
And and I think that the only way to get past that barrier is by acknowledging that power differential and then working towards creating safety in that, like, okay, clear expectations. If you do this, your job is safe. If you do this, you are safe. And then just creating that trust building dynamic that allows for the employer to know that everything is being handled and the employee to ease some of those like psychological barriers to safety in order to create the space that they might need to then get into problem solving mode and like creating the actual structural things that are going to help them be more productive, help them show up in whatever way that means.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's really good. So, you have your experience, and, we want this to be informative to any type of business. But, from your experience or what you've seen in other places, I think it's important to be open to talking about what accommodations um, someone might need, and recognizing that every person is different. Every person's response to their mental health or their mental illness is different, and their needs are all different. But what are some common accommodations that a business should consider, be open to in, um, you know, helping their employee be feel safe?
I am a really big proponent of hybrid and remote work options. I think that they, especially for at least the neurodiversity that I'm aware of, I think that um, there's a quiet that remote work, like usually, I think for me, there's like a sense of safety and quiet and peace and control maybe that I have that I don't have when there's either like the explicit expectation or demand that I show up for 40 hours to sit 9 hour or 8 hours straight every day. I think another accommodation is like flex scheduling or longer breaks in the middle of days so that employees can really focus on the physical and psychological impacts of a day's work, whether that is like a lunch that actually feels like a break and not just 30 minutes in front of a computer, or like what else I'm a big proponent of like what can we add to a day, to a plan, like what more does it need as opposed to like taking things away. And so I think that can we add time to go for a walk around the block? Can we incorporate breaks that feel productive,
Or
in
restful.
or restful, yes. Well, and I think that there's different kinds of rest. There's active rest, and then there's passive rest, and then anyway. But so remote work, flexible scheduling, longer or like modified break schedules, whether that's like hourly or for like a salaried employee. I think we talked about clear expectations, and so that's an accommodation that can be met through assistance, like prioritizing tasks, either weekly, daily, however often an employee needs. I think that's really up to each individual to figure out. I also think that smaller things that maybe people don't think about. I am really sensitive to um, light, sounds, and like textures when I get in my head or I have too much energy or have too little energy. I get really sensitive to like my sensory environment. And so something else is like low lighting in the office. I know that fluorescent lights are a big conversation, I guess, but there's studies, there are very real studies that show that they're at the very least kind of a nuisance for people who can't tolerate the brightness of that type of stimulation for 8 hours a day. I think that something else is, I have chronic pain because I have all these other mental symptoms, and so something that we have also been doing is like the work environment of like the standing desk versus sitting for 8 hours a day. There's just in the same vein that like work-life balance has become less segmented between work and life and work and everything. I think that accommodations that have worked best for me are the ones that give me time, space, and freedom to treat me like a human, as opposed to solely the producer of an output. I think that I have found a lot of my value and recognition and like yeah, value kind
Well,
of like externally. And I think,
and
yeah, go
yeah,
on.
no, I think
Mhm.
it's a company could say, well, I'm paying this employee for 8 hours a day. They should be working those 8 hours. And what you're saying is, well, maybe look at it like how much work do you expect to get done in 8 hours? If you have some of these accommodations where more meaningful breaks, a
Mm.
chance to take a quick walk, you'll still get that 8 hours work of work done if you take those down. If you're forced to just work straight through at 8 hours, you won't be as productive as you would be if you had some of these accommodations.
I also think that's worth maybe acknowledging how many people hide their disabilities at work. So if you can tolerate lights for 8 hours and do that without complaining for your employer, I'm really sorry, but great. I think that it's all of our responsibility, though, to consider what happens after that 8 hours. And does this person have a quality of life that any of us would want? For me, pushing myself to perform the way that employers wanted me to before I was able to advocate for myself, burnt me out before I reached 6 months in the workforce. I think
Right.
that what I think that sacrificing your comfort like that for an employer, I mean, I guess it just shows the generational divide too in some ways, but I think it's really sad that that we've expected people to disconnect themselves from their humanity for so long. And so if accommodations, if formal accommodations for mental health is what moves the needle culturally of us talking about how we can show up with more humanity in every circumstance, then that's fine for me. But I sometimes worry that, yeah, I don't know.
No, I think that's important to say. And, as we talk about this culture change in the workplace, my generation, we're at the tail end of our career. It's the younger generations that have grown up talking more about mental illness, talking more about work-life balance, talking more about all the things that you were just mentioning. Um, these are the workers of today and the future,
Yeah.
not the workers of the past. So we have to, like it or not, we have to meet them where they are if we want to retain workers, if we want workers to be productive, if we want workers to be happy. And I think most companies want their employees to be happy. And there are ways to do it that um, don't take away too much from the bottom line, but actually can increase, the quality and the output of the work while maintaining a happy workforce. Um,
Yes.
I think we've covered a lot, and I do want to mention that, we're fortunate enough as an organization, NAMI Buffalo in Western New York, that we can offer different programs and we can come in and we can talk about mental health in the workplace. We can talk about stigma-free workplaces. We can give presentations, we can share resources. We can connect with other organizations that do similar presentations as well. So, if there's a company out there that wants to know more about how to, you know, work and how to provide for their employees in all these ways, they can reach out and give us a call. They can talk to their HR department to find out what some of the employee assistance programs, the EAPs, have to offer. I think there's some really great EAPs out there. Child and Family Services has a great one, I know. But there are ways to learn more about this. There are ways to build this into your work culture. But it does, like you said before, it does take work and it does take practice, and it's not going to happen overnight.
Mhm.
But it's only going to happen when we communicate openly with each other, when we create that safe space, and when we're willing to, as employers, meet the employees where they are, and then have expectations and clear goals and clear expectations for those employees so that they can get the work done that they've been hired to do. And it's a
Yeah.
partnership. It's it's more of a linear partnership than a hierarchical structure, which I know is right up your alley.
Mhm.
Um, but there are ways to do this. We're happy to help. And however, I'm grateful to you for being patient with me as I learn how to do this better. I'm grateful to you for not to make this a love fest, but I'm grateful for you being open and communicating, what your needs are. And I know that I'm lucky that, I have a certain amount of empathy. I'm lucky that I work for an organization or run an organization that we can do the best that we can to make your accommodations. But, I don't think that's an unreasonable thing for most places of business to consider.
No, I agree. I just think that if we're talking mental health and we're talking about making it easier for people to live fulfilling, authentic lives, then this is such a um, not like universal challenge, but this is something that so many people are going to be touched by in one way, shape, or form. And yeah, having that baseline understanding, having both, like the capacity for empathy and curiosity and meeting people where they're at, but also then allowing for failure on both sides, I think is something um, that I'm very grateful to you that we have, is that we're both allowed to mess up. We're both allowed to get things wrong and still be safe in that. And I think that's a big thing about our culture at NAMI Buffalo in Western New York, like internally, is that it's not like we're pro failure, but I think that we have and understanding that not everything is going to work perfectly, and the capacity to work through any discomfort that comes through the real process of building the culture that we all want to be a part of at NAMI Buffalo in West New York, that we want to then um, help others align with. Yeah.
As long as we fail forward. That's one of
Yes.
my favorite sayings is failing forward. Um, no, and you know, just wrapping this up, what you do, you've done this is you did a NAMI story recently sharing your lived experience with mental illness. Um, you know, we've done it with 6 or 7 other individuals as well. The more conversations that we have of these, the more people that we can get to share their stories, you know, hopefully will help people, whether it's in the workplace or at home or wherever, just be more open to having these conversations and listening to these conversations. So I'm grateful to you for sharing so much. Hopefully that this will have been helpful to some of these businesses, at least to pique their interest and say, hey, what more can I do as a company? And they can give us a call and, you know, we can hopefully guide them in the right direction, which, you know, that's going to be your job. So
Can't
yeah,
wait.
great. All right. Thanks, Ash. I appreciate you doing this.
Thank you.